Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're looking at my top 10 mistakes to avoid in FPL. Now, whether you are a veteran of the game or if you're new to the game, I can guarantee that this video will be useful about things that we should probably try to avoid doing in FPL. If you are enjoying the daily content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Just at the start of the video, I just wanted to say if you get absolutely any value out of today's video, or you've just watched some of my videos before and you've enjoyed them and you're not yet subscribed, please do consider subscribing. I am on the road to 80,000 subscribers. Would massively appreciate you hitting that button. It's completely free to do, but it really does support me. Mistake number one, and this is just my personal opinion, and I should say most of today is just an opinion, is using previous game week's points to drive your decision making, especially with your transfers. Now, what I mean by that is I do not believe myself that using previous goals, for example, this player has scored 4 goals in the last 4 games, therefore you should bring them in, is the best way to make decisions in FPL. Now, of course it makes sense if a player is in form, whatever that may be, let's say they've scored in recent games and they look like they're on a bit of a hot streak, of course it makes sense to want them in your team. But what you need to remember, and this sounds like an obvious point, it's not meant to be patronising, is you don't get previous points for that player. So let's say Almiron, hypothetically, I can't remember what his run was last season, but let's say he scored 6 games in a row and he has 6 goals in 6 games and a few assists in there as well. And you are saying this is a player that continues to rise in price and he's on a real hot streak. Now, the most difficult thing in FPL is timing. When do you decide actually his hot streak's going to end? And when do you decide actually the hot streak's going to continue? My argument would be that you've lost all of those points. Let's say you haven't owned him for any of those 6 goals. You've lost those points now. Those points are absolutely gone. Do you believe that in the preceding games that Almiron will continue to score goals at that rate or continue to score goals that warrant you bringing him in now? If not, could you not try and find the next Almiron? And I would personally say, in my opinion, this is what separates the best managers from the average managers. The best managers look at who is the next player that will be going on that hot streak, not bringing in a player after they've already been on the hot streak for 4, 5, 6 games. Equally, you could time this wrong, and you could do what I'm saying here, which is maybe avoid those players and look for the next one, and Almiron could keep scoring game after game after game, and maybe it was the right idea to bring him in. But what I would say is, especially when it's a player that doesn't have a reputation for going on these hot streaks and hasn't shown that they can maintain that performance at a high level for a long period of time, they're not going to continue scoring points forever. There will be a bit of a drop-off, and you have to try and time that as a manager. So I would argue that rather than using previous goals and assists as a reason to bring a player, rather than saying this player has scored 6 goals in 6 games, therefore I want them, there are 3 other things that you could use, in my personal opinion, that are better to determine whether to bring a player in. The first is underlying data. For example, are their expected goals high over the previous games? Or potentially, are they getting into some really good positions? Because sometimes when you're watching a game, it could be that a player's almost got on the end of a cross 3 or 4 times. That might not even show up in the data, but it might be that you can just identify that that player is looking really dangerous, and on another day, if they'd have just had, if their leg had been an inch longer, then they might have scored a brace. These things happen in FPL, and if you can use your eyes and combine that with data and think that that player was maybe unlucky not to grab goals, they might be the next one to go on a bit of a hot streak. The other thing is, of course, fixtures. Maybe rather than looking at which players have been scoring goals, look at which teams and which players have nice fixtures coming up and which fixtures you think could be targeted where a player could go on a nice hot streak. And then also opposition weaknesses. Something I like to do is look at, does a team concede a lot of chances down their right side? If so, maybe bring in a player that plays on the left side of the opposition team. So you can actually look at specific matchups within the teams as well. So just be a little bit careful. Don't bring in a player just because they've been scoring recently. Try and identify who the next player will be. And if you can jump on that player before other people do, that is when you will do really, really well in FPL. So that is mistake number 1. Let's move on to mistake number 2. So mistake number 2 is a little bit of psychology, and I know a few of the OG subscribers of the YouTube channel are missing the psychology. If you're new to the channel, by the way, I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in psychology. I've written a book on psychology and FPL. It will be rotating above my head. It's linked in the description, and I'm doing a PhD in psychology as well, and I lecture in psychology. So I do a hell of a lot of psychology, and I used to do more of it on the channel, but I haven't done as much recently. This is a bit of psychology, and it's called the law of instrument bias. And the idea of the law of instrument bias is that we have this natural tendency as human beings to over-rely on one tool and also over-rely on familiar tools. So there's a really nice quote from Maslow to kind of encompass this bias, which is, I suppose it is tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail. And the idea here is if you approach every situation with the same method and always use the same tool to try and decide what decision you want to make, then of course you will treat every situation in a very similar manner and you might miss some key details. So the point here is don't use only one thing. I am a very data-driven manager. I love expected goals. I think it is the best tool that we have available to us to decide when future returns will happen, as I said in the previous section. And it also gives you the best idea of the sort of chances that the players have got in previous games too. But I don't over rely on it. I also use touch maps. I also look at fixtures. And as you can see at the end, I also do a bit of an eye test as well. I watch the games myself. I listen to content creators. I listen to people that I trust their opinions. And I do so many different things to try and aid my decision making. It's not just one tool. And I find we get into these debates of you should only use the eye test, or you should only use underlying data, or I only use fixtures. That is a completely backwards way of thinking about FPL. Try and use all of the tools available to you. Use data, use eye test, speak to different people around you. Then what you can do is you can collate all of that information and then you can make your own decision based on that. So for me, try to avoid the law of instrument bias. Don't only use one tool. But I suppose if you are, I do like data because it's slightly more objective than your own opinion. So point number 3 is a mistake that I see a lot of managers making. And to be honest, a lot of experienced managers too. And maybe you won't see this as a mistake, but for me, booking in transfers, or more specifically, booking in too many specific transfers, for me is a big mistake in FPL, especially at the start of the season. Now, you want to plan ahead in FPL. You'll hear me throughout the season and throughout pre-season as well say that I would try to plan 4 to 6 game weeks in advance. I think that is the sweet spot. Any longer than that and you lose sight of the short term. And I think any shorter than that, you lose sight of that medium term 5 to 6 game weeks, which is when a lot of fixture swings can happen. So I really like to have a good idea of the fixtures coming up and the players that I might want to target. But I certainly don't plan ahead to the point where I book in specific transfers for every single week. For example, I don't say I want to make this move in 3 and this move in 4. Because the issue you've got is, let's say that you've built a team which looks really good over the first 3 game weeks. But in game week 4, a lot of your players start to have really tricky fixtures. And by around game week 4 and 5, the team that you had at the start of the season looks really, really poor. And you say, well, it doesn't matter because in game week 2, I'm making this move. In 3, I'm making this move. In 4, I'm making that one. So by game week 5, my team's actually looking fine. That's all well and good, but you are assuming that no other issues will pop up. No other bandwagons that you want to jump on. No injuries, no rotation, no rescheduling, postponements, double game weeks. So many things happen in FPL that you need to stay dynamic and adaptive. So what I prefer to do is build a team where if I didn't have to touch it for the opening 6 to 8 game weeks, it would still be an okay team. What you can then do is you have more luxury transfers. If you do want to make a move, you have that option. But as you can see at the bottom, I've seen a lot of people say, like, game week 2, I'll do Bruno to Diaz. And then game week 3, I'll do Diaz to Sterling. And in game week 4, I'll do Estepinian to James. That means that by game week 4, I've got 2 Chelsea players and 1 Spurs player. It just doesn't happen like that. So by all means, note down your optimal transfer. Sometimes I have a list of optimal transfers. If I have a free transfer, I can make that move. But I never position my team in a way where if I don't make the planned moves, it will be really, really weak and I'll be left scrambling or taking hits. So by all means, plan ahead. But for me, don't book in specific transfers ahead of time. So mistake number 4 is making early transfers. And this could be maybe 3 or 4 separate points, but I'll encompass it within that knee-jerk transfers and also emotional transfers too. The idea is obviously that an FPL game week tends to be a week long. We'll have the games that will end on a Sunday or Monday, and then the new deadline doesn't start until a Friday or Saturday. So normally, let's say it ends on a Monday, you've got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, normally most of the press conferences, and then you've got Saturday morning. So you've got maybe 4 or 5 days between the deadline ending and the next deadline starting. I would highly advise, most of the time anyway, not making your transfer on the Sunday evening or the Monday evening. The reason for that is often it is driven by emotion. Maybe you've had a really poor week and you knee-jerk, or maybe it's driven by a little bit of subjectivity and a little bit of bias. Maybe a player looked really good in the eye test, but then you go away and actually the data wasn't that strong, and maybe you just thought they looked better than they were. Also, you change your mind as well. Throughout the week, you might think that something looks great on a Monday, but let's say by Friday, I don't know, something happens like Mohamed Salah gets injured or something like that. Then all of a sudden you might think that Luis Diaz is now more nailed. And as a result, I really want Luis Diaz. So I would avoid early transfers for so many different reasons. And especially when there is European football and cup football as well. Because in those weeks, injuries are so much more likely. And it will also give us a bit of information about who might be rotated at the weekend as well. So as I've said here, you'll often change your mind or you'll often get new information. The only reason that I would make an early transfer is if you are going to be priced out of the move you want to make and you are 100% sure, as much as you can be, that there is no chance that you want to change your mind. Because obviously if you've got a transfer that you want to make and you've got 0.5 in the bank and you have exactly the money to make it, and by the end of the week, you'll be priced out due to price changes, then of course it makes sense to try and go early. But it could be, again, that the player that you bring in gets injured and all of a sudden you're then having to make another transfer to move away from them. So I never make early transfers. I think I made one in the last 2 seasons on the night of that deadline. And I've made maybe 3 or 4 a season before the final day. I try to make them as late as possible because for me, extra information is more important than team value and more important than bringing in a player at the start of the week. So for me, wait for information. Try not to make early knee-jerk emotional transfers. Now, mistake number 5 is choosing the wrong goalkeepers. And I've put in brackets, I'm not very good at this. If you followed my channel last season, let me know down below in the comments. I had an absolute stinker between Ederson and Kepa. And it's part of what I'm about to say here. I basically broke the 2 key rules in FPL, and I'm going to go through them now. The first thing is expensive does not equal better in the goalkeeper spot in particular. In the rest of the spots, it probably generally does. I would say the more expensive defenders tend to be the better ones. The more expensive midfielders and forwards tend to be the better ones too. Not always, but they tend to. In goal, it's almost always the opposite, apart from Alisson, who tends to do very well because he also makes a few saves. The expensive keepers actually tend to perform slightly worse, especially when you do take into account value, because you want saves as well as clean sheets. And a lot of the more expensive keepers, such as Ederson, doesn't tend to make as many saves. So even if they get a lot of clean sheets, they don't tend to get those kind of 10, 11 pointers that you want. I also find that personally, in my opinion, rotating goalkeepers is difficult to pull off because you can't predict when a keeper's going to get a haul. The reason I say that is, number one, clean sheets are very difficult to predict. I can generally never predict when there's going to be a clean sheet. But also, when they get those monster hauls, and by a monster haul for a keeper, I'm talking about double digits, 10 plus points, it tends to be when they make lots of saves, and they tend to make lots of saves against tricky opposition that you don't expect a clean sheet. So for someone like a Flecken, let's say, if you're picking Flecken from Brentford or you're picking Johnston from Crystal Palace, those kind of keepers will tend to make a lot of saves and keep clean sheets against the likes of a Spurs or a Manchester United. And if you're rotating keepers, you'll probably play the keeper with the better fixture. And in that fixture, your keeper with a trickier fixture might be the one that hauls. So I don't like rotating goalkeepers for that reason. I tend to like one set and forget £4.5 million goalkeeper, maybe stretching to a 5 million if you think they're really good value. So I tend to try and find the best 4.5, start with them and have a 4 on the bench. And like I said, last season, I not only went for Ederson, who was an expensive keeper, I tried rotating an expensive keeper with Kepa, and it was a nightmare. So this season, apart from when I'm playing my bench boost, when it is actually useful, I'm going to try to avoid rotating goalkeepers. I'm going to try to avoid expensive goalkeepers. Just pick one cheap one and hope that he plays well. So mistake number 6 is taking too many hits. But I want to start this section by saying that hits are neither inherently good nor inherently bad. You cannot look at a hit and say it is a good thing or a bad thing. I would say that it's completely dependent on the context, why are you taking that hit, and also if it pays back or not over the future weeks as well. It may be that it was a bad decision to take the hit, but it may well pay itself back. You could conceivably take 100 hits in a single season, and each one individually pay itself back immediately by bringing in a player that scores a goal. But generally over time, and I would say that this is supported by research, well, I've seen tons of people do the research, I don't have it to hand, but it tends to be the case that over time, if you take tons and tons of hits, you are less and less likely to have all of those hits pay off, because losing 4 points over a single transfer is quite a lot. So they are not inherently bad, they're not inherently good, but I would try to minimize them. And I think that the thing that I would like to get across is try to get rid of this idea that you can have the perfect team on paper every single game week, because you can't. We all would love to have what is basically a free hit every single game week, but it's just not possible and it just won't happen. There will be weeks where your team does not look good on paper. There will be weeks where 4 or 5 of your players play against each other or they have tricky fixtures. But remember, it doesn't always happen, and the best team on paper doesn't always do well. Have you ever had it in FPL, if this isn't your first season, where you look at your team and you go, that is the best team I've ever seen, and it gets you like 32 points? Or you look at your team and go, that is a disaster, and you come away with like 80 or 90 points. It's difficult to predict when these players will do well. So the best team on paper doesn't always mean the most points, and equally the worst team on paper doesn't mean the worst points. So what I would limit it to is only take the hit if you really need to. Take the hit if your player is completely red flagged and they can't play and your bench is really poor, or take the hit if it allows you to bring in a double game week player and get an extra fixture, or remove a blank game week player and get an extra fixture in that way. Or if you really genuinely do think that the player that you're bringing in will outscore the player that you're taking out by more than 4 points over the period that you are looking at over the next few weeks. So that's what I try to remind myself as I'm about to take a hit. Do I really need to, or will it definitely give my team an advantage? And if it does, I like taking it. You'll see throughout the season. By the way, make sure to subscribe because it is good to watch. You'll see I love a cheeky hit. I will take a -4. I will take a -8. I'll probably take a -12. 2 seasons ago, I took a -20 and it paid off because you time it correctly. So just be careful about when you're taking them. Try not to take too many, but by all means have fun with it. So mistake number 7 that I see a lot of people making is picking too many differentials. And I should caveat this by saying, if it allows you to enjoy the game more, picking players that no one else has, then by all means go for it. But for me, you're supposed to try and get the most points possible. That is the end goal in FPL. The manager that wins FPL and the manager that wins the mini leagues is the one that gets the most points. So really, I think you should ignore ownership for the most part. However, of course, picking differentials is fun, and I myself like it as well. A few weeks ago, I released a video on my channel literally called The Ultimate Differential Draft, where I looked at players under 10%. So I like picking a differential too. But I feel like you can get blindsided a little bit by ownership, and you can be looking at it too much, and you can also try and have too many ways to beat others and to win FPL. You only need 1 or 2 well-picked differentials to shoot up the ranks. Let's say you own a player that is 4% owned, you are gaining 96% of that player's points. So if they get a 15-pointer, you're gaining pretty much all of those 15 points there. You don't need to have 4, 5, 6 players to do that. You just need to really pick those 1 or 2 well. So I would try to have, for the most part of your team, I wouldn't say go template, I wouldn't say go high ownership, I would say ignore ownership. For most of your players, 13 of the 15, pick the players that you truly believe will get you the most points. And if then with the final 2 you want to have a bit of fun, and you've got like a 50-50, let's say you're trying to choose between a really lowly owned like Phil Foden or a Bukayo Saka, and you genuinely, obviously they're not in this case, but you genuinely believe they are a 50-50, then maybe in that spot you can go for a Phil Foden just to increase that differentialness of your team. But for me, I try to ignore ownership, just try and pick the best players. Mistake number 8 is linked to mistake number 7, but I feel like it genuinely did deserve its own point, because in my personal opinion, and I would argue this isn't even an opinion necessarily, it's probably more of a fact, captaincy is comfortably the most important decision in FPL every single week. I don't think you realise until you play FPL how many points per season is actually made up through captaincy alone. You've got your best player in most cases, and they get double points. It is comfortably the most important decision every week. And I feel like sometimes we don't even give it enough thought. However, I would not be experimenting with captaincy. I feel like this is the big mistake where every single week you try and find someone that beats the popular captaincy choice. Yes, I genuinely do believe that to win FPL and to do very well, you probably do need a well-timed deviation from the popular captain. Every week, every single week, most of this season, Erling Haaland will be the most popular captaincy choice, unless he picks up an injury, of course. But almost every single week, he'll be the most popular one. So there will be the temptation every week to think, oh, could I beat the crowd and maybe go against Haaland? If you think they are the best captaincy that week, someone other than Haaland, then go for it. But most weeks you don't need to take a risk with captaincy. It's got such a high opportunity of going wrong. And like I said in the previous section, you only need 1 or 2 differentials to do well. You don't need 4 or 5 differentials plus a differential captain. That is just a little bit overkill. So in most cases, pick the best captain, regardless again of their ownership. However, I do think a well-timed deviation, specifically in a double game week, can be a really, really nice option. But for me, I tend to stay fairly safe with captaincy. So mistake number 9 is letting others influence you, or at least influence you too much. You won't be able to help it. The people that you speak to and the content creators that you watch, such as myself, will influence the decisions that you make. However, something that I actually value about my content and that I'm proud about with my content is that I will never tell you what to do. What I try to do is present all of the information, give you my opinion, tell you what I'm likely to do, and then allow you to come to your own decision yourself. And I feel like you should genuinely actively avoid anyone, content creators, friends, whoever it may be, that tries to tell you what is the best decision, because no one knows. We're trying to predict the future. It's impossible to do. And even if something looks like it's going to happen, you can never predict that with 100% certainty. And the best thing about FPL is making a transfer, it paying off, and it being a decision that you have made yourself. You know when you have that real gut feeling about a player? For me last season, it was Foden, Bowen and Maddison on my Game Week 8 wildcard. They absolutely smashed it. And all 3 of them, specifically Foden and Bowen, were really lowly owned at the point. They were less than 5% and they smashed it. It's the best feeling in the world. I absolutely love it. And that feeling is completely reduced, I would argue ruined, if you've just copied someone or you've done something that someone else tells you. Your friend told you to bring someone in, you bring them in and they score a goal. For me personally, it just ruins it. I'm just like, yeah, well, I listened to that person helped me to make the correct decision. So try to make your own decisions. By all means, look for inspiration from others. When I watch content creators, and I still sometimes watch FPL content, I will look at them and think, that's inspired me. Maybe I'll go and look into that player in a little bit more detail, and I'll compare it with the decision that I was going to make. I don't ever just look at a piece of content and go, yeah, I want to bring in that player because this person told me they are the best one. Trust me, it will increase your enjoyment of the game doing it this way. So I've left the big daddy for last, in my opinion, the biggest mistake of them all, and that is not finding ways to have fun in FPL. That is such a big mistake. Even myself as a content creator, this is still a hobby for me. And for anyone watching this, it should be a hobby. I feel like we all forget, we're supposed to have fun with FPL, and I do think we do for the most part. But as we know by some of the research that's being done, I myself am doing some research at the moment during my PhD about the effects of fantasy football on mental health. It really does cause some negative emotions in some people sometimes, depression and anxiety. And it shouldn't. It should be a game that we enjoy. A hobby, at the end of the day, is supposed to increase the amount of enjoyment that we have and fulfillment in our lives. So find a way for that to be the case in FPL. You don't have to look at your rank. You can ignore your rank for the entire season if that allows you to have more fun. You can have mini leagues with your friends. You can set up crazy mini leagues with your friends where you can only own players that are below 5% ownership, or you have to own only one player from every single team. You can do whatever you want that allows you to have the most fun with the game. Maybe you don't look at stats at all and you only trust the eye test. I encourage you, I implore you to actively seek ways to enjoy the game as much as possible. For me, honestly, and I genuinely do mean this, the way that I enjoy the game the most is by coming here and recording a YouTube video for you guys and for streaming you. I can promise you I've never had as much fun with FPL as I have over the last couple of years making YouTube videos for you. That is the way that I enjoy the game. I absolutely love it. Try and find your own way. If it's creating a YouTube channel, go for it. Reach out to me, by the way, and I'll try and help you out. Or just play with your friends and do mini leagues or ignore rank or have fun with differentials. Whatever it may be, please find a way to have fun with it and try and remember that point throughout the remainder of the season. And the real winners, as I've said here, are the ones that every single week and every single season get the most enjoyment from the game. So guys, there you have it. Those are my biggest 10 mistakes in FPL that I see every season. And I'll be honest, I'm susceptible to some of these mistakes as well. So do make sure you try and avoid them as much as possible. Let me know down below in the comments, what are some of the mistakes that you think weren't covered here that you would give to someone that's new to the season or just to remind yourself of. By the way, if you do want to get your team rated for free, you can do at the moment over at Fantasy Football Hub. They're also offering a juicy discount at the moment if you use the link in the description. If you have enjoyed today's video, please do drop a like. Make sure to subscribe. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.